There we go. That's all going. And just make this public. Bang. And we're good to go. We're live on four platforms.
Wow, so exciting, so intimidating.
I've learned a lot of stuff. I need to upgrade a bit of my equipment, but I've learned a ton of stuff during all this that I can stream to Twitter, 2 Facebook accounts, and YouTube all at the same time. And then also to I can do comments as we go. So we'll just kick it off. So how about you just introduce you to people that are listening and watching and whatnot? Introduce yourself and what do you do right now?
Hello, everyone. Anyone tuning in, great to be here. Thanks for having me again, Shawn. I'm Dave Mitton, and I guess my silly title is Global Brand Ambassador for Canadian Whiskey and Canadian Spirits at Corby Spirit and Wine / Pernod Ricard. So I look after all of our whiskeys made here in Ontario at Hiram Walker. And now I look after any of our Canadian spirits as well. In all countries they're sold in outside of Canada is the best way to put it.
Which doesn't really, it's not really a job right now, is it? You're so stuck in Toronto.
I am a global ambassador who works from his breakfast nook and his den of booze. And that's kind of I actually the other day was talking to someone, because I mean we've all been doing this for what, 5 months now, 6 months, I don't know. I'm going to have to transform one room in my apartment to literally just kind of the online talk room, because it feels like this is what it's going to be like for the next, certainly here in Ontario. Winter's going to come quickly and it's probably going to stick around for a while this year.
So I'm going to link back to the original thing we did. You were one of my very first episodes at San Antonio Cocktail Conference 2019. So that was the last time we got to sit down and chat on the podcast. Off air, obviously, I just congratulated you on the top 4 International Brand Ambassador of the Year for Tales of the Cocktail, which is massive. We've got some solid Canadian contingency there this year.
There really is. Like we were saying offline, like it kind of went out of my head. And I mean, it was amazing this year where the top 10, like there were so many Canadians from many provinces and cities. And it was really, I think like most of us bursting with pride to see the recognition of all the hard work people are doing. And I mean, there's also tons of people that didn't make the list who are incredible and work very hard, but it was great to see so many well-deserving names on the list. And then, today, when it came out, like I say, I was pleasantly surprised and pretty shocked to see my name on the top 4. And I was not shocked, but I was pleasantly surprised to see some other people like Kelsey Ramage and Katie. And, it is great. There's some wonderful, well-deserving people on that list today. So good luck to all of them in a month's time when it's the number ones are announced.
Oh yes, but it's still
virtually in New Orleans. I guess people will be accepting their awards from their living rooms in their pajamas this year, or maybe they'll get done up, dressed to the nines, which I think would be pretty funny if people put on their
waist up. Just get dressed to the nines from the waist up, and still just wear boxer shorts or pajama pants.
Oh yeah, I'd have like a Canadian tuxedo on the top and maybe just pajamas on the bottom. But who knows? We'll see. How
long have you been with Wises these days?
It was my 6-year anniversary this past June. So it's our Pernod Ricard Corby's fiscal starts every July 1st. So July 1st is our first day of the year. And I got brought on end of June in 2014. And that's, as you know, when I still had the couple little restaurants. So it was the first 3 years, it was doing the brand ambassador. I won't say part-time, but it was contract work, you could say, and still trying to operate the restaurants. To the last 3 years, after we sold the restaurants and bars, it's been full-time global ambassador work.
So how many now with the Canadian whiskey? I think we mentioned it when I was in Singapore last year. How is the perception? Because I feel like you came into as the brand ambassador pretty much at the perfect timing when people started accepting Canadian whiskey as an actual whiskey category that was worth drinking. Like I feel like that early to mid 2010s was when people stopped saying that we put prune juice and shit and orange juice and crap in our whiskey, and so how's the perception changed and the thirst for Canadian whiskey changed since you've come on?
It's come such a long way, and everything you said just now is 100% true. And with amazing people like Davin DeCurgamo, who I know you and I are both buddies with, like having him put out, I mean, the first and only book on Canadian whiskey that I know of, he really was a driving force in helping change the perception and educating people because, and you were someone who was always, we've done seminars at Tales on Canadian whiskey together before. Like, I'll just say this, I think Canadian whiskey still is probably the most misunderstood spirit category in the world, because it's spent 150 years, people not knowing much about it, and the brands and companies themselves just really weren't educating people on it. So misperceptions of, like you say, being able to put anything you want into it, like drink writers were writing that, and that was 100% incorrect, like illegal. And now, whiskey writers, drink writers have been jumping on board the last 6 years, and with amazing people like Dr. Don Livermore, our master blender, like coming up with really innovative blends. And I'll give it to this, like, it's to whiskey connoisseurs and bartenders, the younger generation who are certainly more open-minded, and even, Canada becoming a little more cool in the last 6 years. What I think I've said maybe on the last talk, when I would start going down to the US, for instance, 6 years ago, it was all the Canadian jokes like, how's she going, eh? And everybody would, ask if I rode my moose down to the US. And now when you're down there, people are talking about our sports teams like the Raptors, and people get into our political leaders. Like, people always go on about Trudeau in the US and just our policies and just Canada as a whole. And that really helps the category as well. People are paying a little more attention to Canada. Same goes for overseas. 6 years ago, we were sold in 2 countries. We're now sold in just over 20. And what's great is those countries reach out to us and ask if they could sell our product. So it's not us pushing the category, our brands on them. That's them wanting it. So it is a slow build, a slow climb, but it's been nothing but positive over the last 6 years. It's amazing.
Do you feel, especially with Dr. Don, do you feel like to build this sort of this new following of Canadian whiskey lovers, that there's had to been a little bit of cart before the horse? Like, really, when you start looking at the way Scotch is going, the way Japanese whiskey's going, there's always been this necessary, like, okay, the thirst for that whiskey's come, so okay, we're going to put out weirder blends, and it's really those sort of weirder blends, the older iterations, cask strengths, all these sort of things come out once you have like a really heavy, really saturated base to give them something new. Whereas I find with Canadian whiskey, from all the Canadian whiskey producers, it's kind of like bringing out these new things to get that hook, to get people like thinking like, oh, like Lot 40 cask strength over the classic JP Wise's, like entry-level whiskey, like getting that hook into people so they try Canadian whiskey and fall in love with it almost from the top down instead of usually from the bottom up.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, I have mixed emotions when it comes to innovations, because there's kind of the two sides to it. There's the sales side and there's the marketing side, where a lot of people just want companies to focus on the traditional blends and the key brands, like, don't start making different things until people are buying up your normal product. Mm-hmm. But what you just said is 100% right. Like, if for instance, Lot 40, if Lot 40 maybe isn't getting a lot of attention from, let's say, the American market. Once you put out that cask strength, and cask strength whiskey is a very, Americans love cask strength whiskey. So you put that out, and yeah, that gets a lot of people's attention who might not necessarily pay attention to a traditional Canadian whiskey, or even a lot 40 being 100% rye. And if they fall in love with that, then they'll say, well, what's the normal stuff? What's your traditional blend? And they'll go to that and realize they do love that as well. So innovation, 100%. I don't think anyone can argue with me that it was in the 90s. John Hall really started the tradition of doing things a little bit differently. And, maybe biased opinion because I work for the man, but Dr. Don has been pushing the envelope over the last almost decade on keeping things traditional, but he is taking advantage of the rules and regulations we have as a Canadian whiskey, where some people might think that it's irresponsible, but truly, when you look at the rules and regulations we have, you have the ability to be one of the most innovative whiskey categories in the world. And the more brands and companies that take advantage of that, the better for the category. It will start bringing attention around the world to all of our brands and just to the category itself. And people will realize that we can make some of the best whiskey in the world.
So before we get into it too deep, I want to start talking about COVID and so on and so forth. Do a very brief for everybody who's listening for the first time on the Dave Mitton issue number 1, the origin story of the denim one.
The origin story?
So how did you get in the industry? How did you first get into the industry? Because I think your Halifax stories are fucking legendary. And then the sort of transition into, again, goes back to like, how did JP Wise have that sort of foresight in that 2014 range to hire someone out of Toronto to push the brand?
Yeah, all right. I'll try to sum this up quickly. Yeah, I guess, small town kid growing up in the Maritimes. I decided, I guess right after high school, I didn't want to do the school thing. I wanted to go see the world. And I spent many years backpacking and trying to see the world. And I won't say find myself, because I probably lost myself a little bit in those 5 years, but did have to work my way to see a good chunk of the planet. So I started working in the bar and restaurant industry, all sides of it, and fell in love with the behind the bar aspect, fell in love with wine and beer and spirits, and then, fell in love with cocktails kind of in the late 90s, early 2000s. And like everybody else back then, we weren't Googling stuff, and you had your Dale DeGroff's, and some of the old boys club doing it, but on a very small scale. And I really went for it. I fell in love with the cocktail side of things, and like I say, worked in different places across Canada and the US, and did find myself in Toronto, and managed to scrape up some funds to open up my first bar restaurant, Chahosky, which was that's a whole other podcast in itself, but it was great. Helped me get a bit of attention and bring awareness to the cocktails. And then when we opened up the Harvard Room in 2007, that's kind of when the country itself was really embracing the cocktails. Like consumers were starting to embrace cocktails. And, we got some very nice accolades and press over the 10 years. And what was great is we were a small place, but we were pretty focused on cocktails, and we were in love with all spirits and companies. But I think for me, when the transition started going over to more Corby Pernod Ricard was when Lot 40 was released, and I started learning more about Canadian whiskey, and how Lot 40 was that 100% rye. And I didn't understand anything about Canadian whiskey at that point. I might have thought I did, but I certainly didn't. And the joke being is, I guess I sold enough of it that the company did come to me in 2014 and ask if I'd like to come on board and be the face. Because at that point, There were many ambassadors for different brands around the world, and there were global ambassadors for brands like Havana Club or Beefeater or you name it, like the big brands. And they pitched me a couple of years of being a domestic brand ambassador or a North American brand ambassador. And if all went well, we would transition it and the company would start selling outside of North America. And luckily, that worked out where sales were doing so well over the 3 years that we did start going overseas. And like I said, transitioned to where I fell in love with the challenge, because it's certainly not easy to be the face of a Canadian whiskey, and such an unknown Canadian whiskey too. Let's face it, we're not a household name. JP Wiser's does incredible in Canada. It's generally one of the top 2 every year in sales. All our craft range like Lot 40, Pike Creek, and Goodrum and Warts, relatively unknown unless you're a bartender or a whiskey connoisseur. And that's where the challenge comes. I'm walking into places, I'm walking into countries and cities that don't even really realize Canadian whiskey is a thing, and I'm presenting brands to them, and I'm challenging them and convincing them that they need this in their portfolio and on their back bar. And it's a lot of fun. I'm like yourself, I get pretty bored if I'm not challenged. So I need to. I don't want to just have a smooth sailing day. I need to be challenged every day, and have to work a little bit harder so I can sleep well at night. I'm not happy unless I'm going crazy.
Do you still find that a lot of Canadian bartenders still horribly misunderstand Canadian whiskeys, even with all the work you've done, the work that 40 Creek has done, the work that Tish has done, like all this? There's some really great brand ambassadors for Canadian whiskey in Canada. Do you still feel like this sort of over geekism on Canadian whiskey? Like, I've sat at bars, I think we've talked about this before, I've sat at bars in Vancouver mainly, and there's no Canadian whiskey on the back bar whatsoever. And I'm you don't have Lot 40, you don't have like 40 Creek, you don't have like some of the high-end Canadian clubs. And they're like, no, Canadian whiskey's bullshit. I'm like, yeah, but you've got Masterson's and Whistle Pig on the back bar. And so you're trashing Canadian whiskey while you still have these brands that are basically Canadian freaking whiskeys on your back bar. And you're talking about the virtues of Whistle Pig when you are then trashing Alberta Premium.
Yeah, as I repeated myself from earlier, education. The more brands get on board with educating, because you know this, but anyone watching that's not aware, Canadian whiskey is simple. To be a Canadian whiskey, we've international law, we use cereal grain. At Hiram Walker and Sons, we use corn, rye, wheat, and barley are the 4 major grains we use. Now, with Canadian whiskey, the process, I guess, would be opposite of bourbon, where bourbon is blended at birth. They blend and make a mash bill, and they distill and age in a certain way. That's one of the 39 categories of American whiskey. In Canada, we have 1 category of whiskey, Canadian whiskey. And those 4 grains are fermented separately, and by law, they have to be fermented in Canada. They're distilled separately, and they're distilled in different ways. We have to distill in Canada. They're aged separately, aged in different types of casks for different amounts of time, minimum 3 years, and it has to be aged in Canada. This is why we have master blenders. It's, you can do the math. Hiram Walker and Sons, our distillery, we probably put out 1 million cases a year of our brands of Canadian whiskey. But at our distillery, we put out over 5 million cases a year of product. So, a lot of companies can buy whiskey from us. You and I could start a whiskey company tomorrow, and we could buy from Hiram Walker and make our own blends. But yes, you don't need to, certain categories of American whiskey, you don't need to ferment it, distill it, or age it in America. You just need to buy it, and you can put it in a bottle. And oh, my battery's running out. Give me a second, Shawn. 1 second. Rookie move on my part.
You didn't plug in the phone?
My phone. I was just rushing around. Someone called me right before. I had I had a nice call from Christine Wiseman, a broken shaker out of LA right before you called. So we got on the phone for a minute. But yeah, we're good now. Apologies for that.
That's all.
Yeah. So yes, the
podcast.
It's just people not knowing. I mean, I do it all the time. When you sit and you give a class and you teach, I'm doing a sit down with the gentleman who's doing a virtual cocktail class tomorrow because he's killing it, but he's not using really any Canadian whiskeys. And he reached out to me and wants to know more about them. And over the phone, I was like, oh man, this guy knows what he's talking about. But as you said, it's kind of funny. He was just rambling off stuff about American whiskey and he's well educated, but he really just didn't know much about Canadian whiskey. And that's because he has no one's coming to see him. No one's coming to teach. Like, again, maybe he didn't look into it as much, but there's not that much information on it either.
No.
And that's changing now with whiskey books. Like Robin Robinson just put out his latest book and it's incredible. He's got a beautiful chapter on Canadian whiskey in it, along with American, Irish, and Scottish. And that's starting to change now. Whiskey writers, Dave Broom's always been a great advocate for Canadian whiskey. And until everybody is, it's going to take some time. Like I said, the last 6 years have been great, but it's not going to happen overnight. We're fighting 150 years of misconceptions and wrong information that's been written down. So for us to change people's perceptions, it's just not going to happen overnight.
Well, that's a really good segue. Like on a personal level, or like personal and career-wise, how has the presumptiveness of what a brand ambassador does changed for you over the last 6 years? Because I think a lot of youngsters in this day and age get into brand ambassadorship thinking it's just going out on Friday nights and charging the company card and that sort of thing. So how has your personal and career-wise changed since you became the brand ambassador?
That is a great, you're 100% correct, because yes, when brand ambassadors did originally start, you've got to throw out like to the originals, like the big boys, like, the Chris Patinos and the Charlotte Boise's and so the big boys and girls, and then the Simon Fords, like kind of the OGs, like,
yeah.
And that was back when, I admit, when I was a bartender, I thought that these guys and gals just threw parties for us, but there's so much more to it. There's so much more to it. And it's changed quite a bit in the last 6 years where, yes, when I started 6 years ago, a lot of it was you'd go out with the Corby Pernod Ricard teams and you'd visit accounts and you'd go buy drinks and, you'd forge relationships, and it's a lot of fun, but behind the scenes, the stuff that people aren't Instagramming or putting on Facebook, there's a lot of work to it. For instance, mine, which has changed on such a positive note in the last 6 years, is I get to work very close with the brand teams and trade marketing and the sales team to work on, even like working with everyone at the distillery, like working on different innovations and getting to be part of that, learning from that. With Canadian whiskey, our biggest thing is education. We just finished, I won't say we, Gina Fawcett, who is our national educator in the US, say national ambassador, she's our trade brand educator manager. She has spent most of COVID creating an 8-week course, kind of almost like at the level of a WSET. And we're testing it right now with the importers, sales teams, and distributors in the US. And it's 30 minutes a week. And it is deep diving. Like, I even know Dr. Don was impressed. So when you're done this course, I mean, there's not going to be much that you don't know about Canadian whiskey. And Gina gets pretty geeky and sciencey as well, where I'm more of the guy talking and entertaining and trying to make you laugh by being silly. We're a great team together because she's the instructor, the teacher. I'll talk about the brands, make some cocktails, talk about the history of Canadian whiskey and cocktails and what kind of cocktails work with each blend. But this is what we have to do now. Like, it's strictly education with a little sprinkle of fun. Like tonight, I'm going to out with a few friends and we're going to social distance on a few patios. And yeah, I can't wait to go out and see some people and see what they're doing with summer cocktails and Canadian whiskey. But yeah, it's really turned to education, engagement, advocacy. And it starts with the bartender. For me, for my brands, it starts with the bartender. They're the ones that really get into some of our brands. And then that snowballs down. Like, you know what it's like. If you're behind the bar and you're making a drink and a person asks you for an old fashioned and you just feel like grabbing the lot 40 that night and they've never heard of it, the consumer now, they're curious too. They want to know. They're going to look at you and say, what is that? And luckily, I know you're going to be able to explain everything and what it is right away. And the idea is hopefully they will love that 100% rye old fashioned. And next time they're at the liquor store, they might see a bottle, or hopefully they'll go looking for it. And then they'll buy it, and that'll snowball, and they'll tell their friends at home. And you know, it's pretty simple, but that's kind of what you hope for when it comes to little brands like this. We don't do big, massive ad campaigns, and you know, our brands of Canadian whiskey are really on-premise, bar and restaurant focused, and it kind of goes from there. JP Wiser's, like I say, it being a much bigger brand, consumers in Canada certainly know that and trust it, and it's just been around. You know, our fathers and grandfathers drank JP Wiser's. Now that the smaller craft stuff, yeah, that's kind of hitting more of the bigger cities in Canada and the cocktail and whiskey bars. And then it's been growing from there, which has been great to see and watch.
So with that sort of like heavy OP, that heavy OP sort of following for the brands, apart from the 8-week course that I want to do now, like just sign me up, just send me the link, tell me how much it is, and I'll freaking do the 8-week course. I'll be down for it pretty hard. Just because I'd like to geek out about it. I'm just been trying to get
of course
done during COVID. I'm going to try and get as many courses as I can get done. So I'm studying for my Cicerone right now as well. So, but how has the brands? How have you had to pivot and change the sort of dynamic, the way you do stuff, when most of your brands, like you said, are very on-premise, restaurant, bar heavy, sort of focused and following? How's the next 6 months looking for you?
You know, I'm one of the lucky ones that managed to hold on to their job and a paycheck over the last half a year, and very grateful for that. Kind of been the joke is, like I say, Gina and I have been, I've been joking around that we've been creating robots online to replace ourselves ultimately, because everything we do is now being transformed online. Luckily, everyone we've been doing this with has said they've really appreciated it and it's helping, but they finish off the conversation with saying, we can't wait to have you back in market face to face, because it is just much better when we're all in a room together. You know, I can't wait to be sitting. This is great today, but I had much more fun, I think, when we were in San Antonio and we're getting kicked out of cafes to continue this podcast. That was the one-on-one experience is great. Screaming at Sam and Dinah that are walking by. Like, that's just, that's more my style. I love that. Now with this is the way it's going to be for a while, for me at least. I don't think I'll be back on a plane until next summer at the very earliest, which is pretty crazy. You know, if that's the case, then I'll be saying that I was locked in my apartment for 16 months doing live streams and classes every day. But I mean, that's what it is. I mean, everybody's in the same case, really. Where the US is one of my major markets, I'm not going to be going back down there for a little while until things settle down and get straightened out. They've got quite a few cases. And I mean, even I don't think I'll be going overseas. Certainly not this fall. And then, you know, as the winter goes, let's hope things don't get worse, but I think we're all kind of preparing ourselves for a bit of a lockdown in the winter months. So I'll be here. I'm excited to be in Toronto for a year. That's kind of nice. And I've gotten used to this change of lifestyle, because I was at 130 flights a year. And now I'm going to bed at an early time. I'm really not drinking that much. I'm eating better. I'm cooking for myself. I'm exercising to try to not put on COVID pounds. And it's a big change, but I am excited to be able to get back out. Now, I have a feeling that won't look the same as it used to. I can't see myself traveling as much as I used to when we come out of this, but who knows? Everything's pretty uncertain at this moment.
How much video and digital stuff are you doing right now? Like you were saying, you're turning one of your one of your rooms in your in your apartment just into a AV lounge.
I'm filming. I mean, I won't say I'm filming every day, but you could almost say I'm filming every day. Like this afternoon, I have to do 3 different videos that I could spend the next week doing it, but I'm just going to do the 3 different videos today, set up a little place in my apartment. Tomorrow we've got classes online. Wednesday I'm free. Thursday I have classes online. Friday classes all online, and then I have to do a big seminar in the evening Friday night for a happy hour. So yeah, it went from like waking up and like, I don't care if I showered today, I'll do a meeting. But now it's like you're waking up and you got to be presentable for the camera. You've got to, it's this is the new world we're in right now.
So you go.
No, you go ahead.
On a personal level, like, are you happy and comfortable and content with the brand ambassadorship role? Is it something that you can see yourself continuing to do for years to come? Or I've talked to Angus, I've talked to Simon, I've talked to Charlotte. Charlotte obviously is a long-standing brand ambassador. I think she's going on something like 15 years or some crazy number right now. Do you see this as a long-term?
Hats off to that woman. My God, she's amazing.
About it. Do you see it as a long-term thing for you personally?
If you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said no. Like when I did sign up, the idea was to keep the restaurants and bars and keep doing that. And I did the restaurant thing it was 19 years and 17 plus years on the bar 5 nights a week. And it was amazing. And I'd be lying if I didn't say that every day some kind of a great memory goes through my head and I didn't miss it, because I do. I'm also at the stage now that if I had not been doing this and still had the bars and restaurants, I'd probably be at this point step back from doing normal bar shifts and would be hopefully mentoring and bringing on some of the big, bright, shiny stars that we have in this country to take over. And who knows what would have happened there. As far as this goes too, the brand ambassador, I'm loving this because I really didn't see myself doing more than a year or two. And again, was my perception on what a brand ambassador did, which I've learned now. It's such a challenge, which I love. Anyone that knows me, the reason I did this is I love the brands. I use them all. The joke is if Corby or Pernod Ricard didn't need me tomorrow, I'd probably retire from it, because I don't know if I could legitimately move on to anything else and, be sincere about it. I love the idea of growing with Corby and Pernod Ricard and working on education and mentorship for people. And there are ways I can grow with the company. So yes, I could see myself doing this, maybe stepping back from as much travel. I mean, my dream was always to start building a grad course, as the Irish whiskeys like Jameson and Redbreast and our Scottish whiskeys like Chivas and Glenlivet have their little army of ambassadors. Mm-hmm. That was something I'd like to see happen. Now, right now, none of that really makes sense for any brand in the world. But we'll see what the future holds. But yes, I do love this company. I've fallen in love with it and what I've been doing. That I could see myself growing even older than I am now. and evolving. I mean, if it was just to remain in this position, I don't think I'd be able. This has a bit of a time cap on it. Like I couldn't see myself doing this in my mid 50s or 60s, but way down the road when that happens, I'd love to see that I'd still be part of the education aspect on Canadian whiskey and being a bit of a face for the brands, I would hope. Yeah, I love it. I've fallen in love with this role.
So with that evolution, has the innovation side of things with new whiskeys coming out sort of stalled with retail and OP been a little bit quieter than usual, or has it as it's still for Dr. Don just like business as usual, bringing out new expressions and stuff like that? And
You're
second part of that is, when does Dave Mitton get his own freaking like expression? When do you get your very own like lot 40, the Dave Mitton edition?
well, I mean, to answer the first part of your question is innovation is still happening at Hiram Walker and Sons. Now, it's not at the same rate that it has been over the last 6 years. For instance, Dr. Don and the team just put out a Pike Creek, I think it's right here, 15-year-old, which is unfortunately just being sold in Canada, but they're kind of seeing it's a 15-year-old corn whiskey finished in Cabernet Sauvignon barrels, and that is a partnership with our winery in Niagara, where they've made whiskey barrel finished wine as well. So like that's one thing. I think you're going to, well, I know you're going to see a couple JP Wiser's expressions come out this fall and winter, but it's slowed down a touch of what we're releasing. But as far as what they're doing at the distillery, talking to Dr. Don, no, he's got lots of fun stuff going on that we will see down the road. He's down to, I mean, he's doing lots of barrel finishing, but he's experimenting with grains now. You know, Dr. Don, like it gets, it doesn't get more sciencey and geeky. Like he's got some cool stuff that we're going to see in the next decade hitting shelves. I'm obviously not at liberty to really talk about them online, but no, in the distillery, they're keeping up. What we're releasing right now, we're trying to be reasonable and not just start throwing a new expression out every month. A lot of people are not spending as much money as they normally do. And, you know, we don't want to overwhelm or saturate the market. As far as a Dave Mitton expression, that might be quite a while before the company wants to see something like that, but you never know. I mean, that would be pretty cool. We do get to, when we bring people to the distillery, part of our day tour is everyone spends 3 hours with Dr. Don learning to make their own whiskey. And I mean, every time I'm there, I just make a new blend because why not? So 6 years of making blends, I think I've come up with one or two that maybe we could maybe we can convince Dr. Don might be able to be worthy to be put in a bottle, but I wouldn't expect anything like that anytime soon. But at least I get to play around and learn every time I'm there.
I think we should start a petition for it. Dave Mitton brand needs to come out. It needs to be maybe for your 10-year anniversary as the brand ambassador.
Maybe, who knows? We'll see. That's 4 years away, so we got 4 years to work on that.
Everybody, well, I appreciate your time. It was great catching up. Thank you so much. I've been in Victoria. This is the longest I've been in Victoria for like a decade. So it's not traveling is just killing me. And so I feel your same sort of sentiment of like just wanting to get back on a plane, but you just can't right now.
Yeah. Well, at least you're in one of the most beautiful places in Canada. Like it is a gorgeous place to be stuck. I don't feel so bad for you if you're stuck in Victoria. It's a pretty good place to be grounded right now.
I'm pretty happy, and the girls haven't got sick of me being home for as long as I have been either, because that's always the worry as well.
Yeah.
Dad being around for too long, all of a sudden everybody starts not liking Dad so much anymore because he's been around too long.
I'm sure they just keep you locked in that little room with all your spirits and your cameras going on.
That's pretty much. I have my little basement, and I stay down here. I stay in my box. But thanks for your time, man. I hope to catch up with you for a drink soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me today, Shawn. Talk to you soon.
Buddy. I'll chat to you soon. Bye.